I'm Amy Shannon, and this is another video in my Reminiscence of Ballstown, Echoes and Whispers of Forgotten Legacies. And it is going to be another reading. And this video is about Julia Stone Crandell Shields. She was a wife, mother, daughter, heir, and survivor. Um, so behind me, you will see a photograph of the Crandall house, and I have it in black and white on purpose. It also appears in my book in black and white um, because this is not just a story about another. Uh, Previously, I did a video on Eliza Walsh, and her legacy ended up being a ghost story. And in sometimes this also, this Crandall House, as they would call it, would is also part of lore and local legend of the house being haunted by Mr. Crandall. And I will kind of dive in here and share a little bit about Julia Stone Crandall Shields. And many people uh, may hear the ghost story about what happened, but maybe people do not know all the exact details, only what was published in local newspapers. So I'm just going to dive in and do a reading about Julia Stone Crandall Shields. If you live in Ballston Spa long enough, you may hear about the haunted Crandall house and the ghost stories about Sylvester Crandall, maybe only knowing his last name, walking in the cupola of his home. But this is not about Mr. Crandall, the murdering husband of Julia Stone Crandall. It's about Julia herself. Julia was a divorced mother of Julie Berkeley, who was wealthy, as her father left her and her mother a substantial wealth portfolio. Something like that drew in the likes of Crandall. This is his end. On December 19th, 1887, he killed himself after shooting his wife's family, killing her mother and her daughter, and injuring Julia, who had life threatening injuries, but she survived. So now I'm going to take a step back and talk about Julia. Julia was the daughter of Mary and Samuel Stone. Mr. Stone was a paper collar manufacturer. Julia married Cassius Bulkeley in 1870, who was an insurance broker. The couple had Julie. Later, Julia filed for divorce of Cassius, and it was granted. Of course, it is when you think back to the 1800s, usually uh, it's harder for a woman to get a divorce than it is for a man to initiate it. Um, but but because she came from a successful family and they were very wealthy, that might have had something to do with her being able to divorce her husband. Uh, Her father, Samuel Stone, died in 1866, and Julia was strong like her mother and a formidable woman. All the women in Julia's family were strong women. Crandall was a colleague of her first husband and seemed to be successful as well. The fortune was controlled by Mary Stone, Julia's mother. Both Mary and Julia were very well educated women and controlled their household finances. This did not sit well with Crandall. Crandall had a tough time keeping a job and managing his own money, yet he was a debt collector and financially savvy. That just doesn't make sense to me. When Crandall married Julia, he was not just married to Cassius' ex-wife, but lived in his home and slept in his bed. Back then, this was very improper, and even their Reverend, Dr. Irvin, refused to marry the couple. So I guess that's also part of the thing is if you get divorced and remarried, and you still live in your original home and you are now sharing a bed with your new husband that you shared with your old husband, I guess that was kind of taboo. Maybe she should have just got a new bed. Crandall pressured Julia to get her mother to give her the entire inheritance and take control of her father's property. But Julia was smart. She left it in her mother's capable hands. Crandall's intentions was about love, but was also more about fortune. He had a habit of living beyond his means. Crandall ended up living with his mother-in-law, his wife, and his stepdaughter. When the Crandells moved to Ballston Spa, they bought the family mansion. It was a former residence of Colonel B. F. Baker, who built it, furnished it, and maintained the 5 acres of land. It is a 3-story home, and because of its position, there is a splendid view of the village of Ballston Spa. Mrs. Stone eventually sold her own home and had another built. She sold that house to Mr. Thompson Shields. In the spring of 1887, she moved in with her daughter and her granddaughter and Mr. Crandell. It was rumored, and yet probably the truth, that the two fought incessantly over money, and Crandell was often seen by himself in the house cupola, pacing. If you're not familiar with the cupola, that is that really tall piece up there. Um, so that is what they called it back then. Let's see. Okay. Um, yeah. In 1887, Crandall entered the kitchen where Mary, Mrs. Stone, Julia, and young Julie was eating breakfast. When he shot, the women ran from the table to the kitchen while he ran after them, still shooting. His focus was on Mary. And then he saw Rebecca, Mrs. Ellis, and he shot at her but missed. Uh, Rebecca Ellis was Mary's sister. Um, let's see. Mary ran from the house and fell into the snow, dying from her gunshot wound to the breast. Then he reloaded his revolver and shot young Julia at close range. He then shot his wife Julie, who received 3 wounds in the groin. Then Sylvester went up to the cupola and shot himself. Mrs. Ellis was uninjured. Even even when he kept shooting at her, she escaped and ran for help. The doctors of the town heard her cries for help and entered the scene. Though they thought Julia would die from her injuries, she survived. This happened on the weekend because on Monday morning, Julia was planning to go to Troy with her daughter, mother, and aunt in order to consult with their attorney. Crandall had a history of abuse towards Julie and Julia, and it is speculated that they were planning on getting a divorce. Crandall was buried in the Horton Field Cemetery, which is now referred to as the Ballston Spa Village Cemetery. Mary and Julie were buried in Troy at the Oakwood Cemetery. Julia and her aunt, Mrs. Ellis, got help for them. Though her injuries were severe, and the consensus was that she would not live, however, she survived. She was clear-headed, even though critically injured, when she told authorities what had happened. Julia lived a full life and married a third husband, Mr. Thomas Shields, in 1895. She had 2 stepdaughters. Thomas lived until 1803, and Julia lived to the age of 70, after having a lengthy illness, and then she died in 1921. Julia didn't just survive, she lived. And I think that is something worth knowing about and worth talking about, especially because there are so many things that went wrong in her marriage, but she was strong and she survived. And it is amazing. I read police reports and a lot of documentation on what she said and what was released. I read the newspaper articles and all of that. And I just found that I can imagine because he shot her last. So she knows that he shot her mother and he shot her daughter. And yet gets shot last before he goes up and kills himself. So she's probably pretending to be dead so he doesn't keep shooting her. And her aunt, thank goodness her aunt was there, and she was able to call for help. And um, that kind of help back then, there wasn't like a coroner or, a set of like police. So there were constables and there, which were uh, village police. And there were several doctors that came in, and doctors would be called to scenes like this. Um, whether it was whatever type of death it was. So several doctors were took care of them. They tried to take care of Mary and Julia, and they respected them. They laid them out on tables, and then when they realized Julia and Mary had were already gone, they covered them, and they continued to work on Julia. And I think that it it shows her resilience because of her being shot where she was, and she's bleeding, and she has these doctors trying to save her life. She could completely tell them exactly what happened and the events that happened. And then, they talked to Mrs. Ellis, um, and that she gave her statement as well. Even though it is amazing that she was not injured at all. Um, so this story is about her strength. She survived, and it also shows that domestic violence is something that it's it's like it's been there since the beginning of time. Um, the inclination to hurt or kill somebody, um, and then being a survivor because of what you can do. And while she was a survivor, she lost her child, and a very young child, and she lost her mother. And those two people were her life. Um, but she had she was able to move forward. Um, she made the decision to not have more children, but she did help her her third husband, Thomas, raise his children. So I just wanted to share her story because it's one of those ghost stories. And the ghost story behind it is that sometimes, and even the night that it happened, after the scene was all cleared, that a neighbor who lived across the street thought he saw Mr. Crandell pacing up and down in the cupola. But this was long after he had been dead and his body had been removed. So that is the ghost story, that sometimes people can see him wandering around. Um, and it shouldn't go beyond that. He does not deserve um, peace, but he shouldn't be haunting anyone else either. So I want to thank you again. If you are interested, please purchase a copy of the book. Um, and also, leave a comment, or if you read the book, please leave a review. I want to thank you very much, and I will see you in the next video.